Louisiana Baptist, and let me tell you at the very beginning that Louisiana was probably, no problem to it. It was the slowest growing state for Baptist conversion. And there's several reasons for that. Well, one of the reasons is because it was 1803 before the United States took control. However, it was 9 years later before the First Baptist Church was here. And I'm sure that it took some time for, people to Americanize, if you will, the territories. But not only that, but then immediately in 1812, you have the War of 1812. And evidently, Andrew Jackson came right through here as he came to New Orleans, from what I've been able, growing up in Mississippi, we didn't study a lot of Louisiana history. But from what I understand, the path that Andrew Jackson took to New Orleans was basically right through Washington Parish, what is now Washington Parish. So you had the War of 1812, and just because the United States took over in 1803 from Spanish regime, from Spanish reign, that doesn't mean that everybody was open to Americans. It doesn't mean that everybody was open to Baptists. And so that part of it was hard. And then it seemed like the church began to grow. The Baptist church began to prosper somewhat in Louisiana, and along came the debate over slavery. In 1845, as we'll see, that the Southern Baptists left the Triennial Association to form their own association. The Southern Baptists have tried to make it things other than slavery. Folks, it was slavery. That's why the split took place. If you go back, and I have looked at the old Southern Baptist minutes when they were petitioned by the Triennial minutes for that matter, but they were petitioned by the Southern Baptists. It was because that the managers of the association out of Boston had said that a man could not go on the mission field if he owned slaves. And the contention that the Southern Baptists had with the Triennial Association was simply that, that ought to be a matter for a man in his own conscience, that we're not going to dictate that. That's why the split occurred. It was no doctrine. They state that as they leave, that they're in full fellowship doctrinally with the Triennial Association, but that it's a matter of them usurping authority over local churches, and it was simply over slavery. So you had not only a war of 1812. That's good. Not only did you have the War of 1812, but you also had the Civil War, and of all the southern states outside of Virginia, Louisiana suffered the most. And one of the reasons that Louisiana suffered the most in the South is because that a lot of the people fled to Texas with their slaves, and so the population decreased. I think I have a slide that shows a letter from the Southern Baptist Convention, a statement that was made in one of their minutes about the decline that had took place from the Civil War. And so after the Civil War, about 1870, it begins to pick back up again. But as always, you have divisions and you have schisms that come in. And once again, the Southern Baptist Convention divided, and we'll go through all of that. Just let me suffice it to say in the very beginning that I think it's safe to say that no state in the Union has suffered in getting the message of the Baptist Church across the way Louisiana has. And today, you compare it to the other southern states, and per capita, there's fewer Baptists per capita in Louisiana than in any other southern state. It remains that way today. So what I want us to do is, like we've been doing on Bible study night, I want it to be very informal. I want you to stop me with whatever question you have. I'm not sure I can answer every question, but I want you to stop and feel free for everyone to discuss what we're talking about. So, can everybody see with me here, or do I need to get here? Here? Triennial Association. It was called that because it was triennial. It was called that because it met every 3 years, and what it was just an association. It wasn't really a convention. It was just an association of Baptists North and South. All right. Louisiana is without Baptist churches until 1812. One thing that I mentioned in the introduction is the Black Code that was in place. And this is part of the Black Code. And I want you to notice that, it's called the Black Code because it was introduced in 1724, and it had 54 articles, and I didn't copy all of them, but it had 54 articles that dealt with how you handle your slaves. And not only that, but how you handle freedmen. At this point, it was even going to apply as time went on. There was ways even then that slaves could be freed. They could be bought, or they could be in servitude for a certain number of years. And so this was strictly, supposedly, to deal with slaves. But notice right off, the first decree, the expulsion of all Jews from the colony. Now, I don't understand why that was the first one when it's a code that was designed to deal with blacks. So you see how strict it was, though. It makes it imperative for the masters to impart religious instruction to their slaves. But the only religious instruction that they can impart is Catholicism. Permits the exercise of the Roman Catholic creed only. Negroes placed under the direction of supervision of any other person than a Catholic are liable to confiscation. If you own a slave and you're not a Catholic, you run the risk of your slave being confiscated. Sundays and holidays were to be strictly observed. But the things that stood out to me, and this is why I copied this part of it, is just 1 and 2. It was a code that was supposed to be set up to deal with the black population, the colored folks, the Negro slaves. But these two are stuck right in the middle of it, or right at the beginning, I should say. And it expels all Jews and permits nothing but Roman Catholicism to be taught. That's what the missionaries had to come in under just a few years later in 1803. And so this mindset had not gone away. Just because it was, what would that have been? In 1724, but the code stayed in effect until 1803. And so when the missionaries came in, it was still in effect. Is there any question about the Black Code? That's one of the reasons that Mississippi had churches organized earlier than Louisiana did. South Carolina earlier than Mississippi. Georgia earlier than South Carolina. And it all has to do with Roman Catholic control. Any question? The Baptist missionaries to Louisiana, and there's no way I could name all of them, but Bailey Cheney, I want you to notice something, that all of these folks are coming from South Carolina originally. And that's important because the chain of Baptists to Mississippi was South Carolina. Georgia affected others. And by the way, the Georgia Association, if you want to go look at it sometime, the early Georgia Association of Baptists was much less Calvinistic than the South Carolina Association of Baptists. And in turn, because South Carolina was, Mississippi was, and because Mississippi was, the first associations we see in Louisiana, not just the first associations that we see in Louisiana, they're very Calvinistic in their articles of faith. So Bailey Cheney, he was the first one that they say preached west of the Mississippi, the first one to bring a message. He was arrested the night that he preached it, and he agreed never to come to the state again and preach, and so he left. Joseph Willis was, he's kind of a unique individual. Joseph Willis was one of the early missionaries. He and Ezra Courtney, they worked together, but they worked in separate parts of the state. And so Joseph Willis his mother was a full-blood Cherokee Indian. She was a slave. His dad was a wealthy plantation owner. And so there was a lot of, argument before he finally got his inheritance. But when he did, he was independently wealthy. But not only was he independently wealthy, he was mighty dark-skinned because he was half Cherokee Indian. And so he came from South Carolina, and one of the reasons they wanted him to come was because he spoke Cherokee language, and he looked like them. And so he's very instrumental in establishing one of the first associations that, by the way, now, and it's hard to say that it's the same association, but now that association is an association of black churches. And the reason for that is because he was very mindful, I guess, because of the discrimination against him. They wouldn't send him out as a missionary to start with in South Carolina. They said because of his lowly condition. Well, it certainly wasn't because of his money. It had all to do with the color of his skin. That's what made him low to the Baptists. And so, but they finally, after 2 or 3 times, they got him endorsed, and he was a very effective preacher in the northern part of the state. That's mainly where his work was done. Ezra Courtney, he came from Amite County in Mississippi. He originally was from South Carolina, had settled in Amite County. From all accounts, everything that you read about Ezra Courtney, he was just a dynamic, just a fireball preacher, and just very zealous in his work, very zealous in what he did. And most all of the churches in our area in the early part of the 19th century had Ezra Courtney's handprints on them. Howard Wall worked with Ezra Courtney. I don't know. There's not a lot you can find about Howard Wall. If you can find more about it than I can. I looked, and there's just not a lot of information on Howard Wall. Now, I want to say to you that, with these men that had the names and they get the recognition, there was a lot of others that came with them. These are just the ones that stood out. Leaders always emerge. You don't pick them. They just kind of emerge. And these men emerged to be leaders of the Baptist movement in Louisiana at the turn of the century. I just thought this was interesting. Georgia had 13,000 Baptists. South Carolina was 12,000 by 1813. Mississippi was most influenced by South Carolina missionaries, and Louisiana was most influenced by Mississippi. And there's a reason for that geographically. That's all that is because, you could preach on both sides of the river from Mississippi. And so Bailey Cheney actually came from Natchez, and he preached across the line at Natchez, was where he was arrested and exiled from Louisiana. Ezra Courtney came from the east side. He came from Macomb, Amite County. And his first stops were right in here, Washington Parish. Any questions? Look, did y'all talk about this the other night? I mean, I know y'all all know this. The Half Moon Bluff Baptist Church, it existed. It was the first Baptist church in Washington Parish. It was the first Baptist church in Louisiana. This Joseph Willis, he established one about 5 weeks later. I don't remember where it was, Shreveport, I think. But they were close in their date. But it's accepted and true that Half Moon Bluff was the first Baptist church in Louisiana.
Who was instrumental in starting the Half Moon?
Ezra Courtney. And it existed from 1812 to 1830. And, probably the decline, and there's a lot of, the thing about history, when you study history, you got to consider your sources, and you got to, some people at First Baptist Church make claim to, Half Moon Bluff Baptist Church. That may be so. I don't know. Here's what's more likely. Hayes Creek is the one that followed Half Moon and Mount Pisgah. That's probably the more likely scenario, based on where the ferries were, based on where these people of Half Moon, where they kind of settled, where the census says they were. Some of them were right out here, Mount Pisgah. Others were at Hayes Creek. So that's probably more likely what happened to the remnant of Half Moon in 1830 was that some of them distributed and started Mount Pisgah, and some of them started Hayes Creek. I think really if you look at it who is a historian that did a lot of history in Washington Parish? Preston, who? What's his last name? Gibbs. So, I mean, he's really done a lot of study. And I think if you follow, was he a judge? It says the Honorable Preston Gibbs. Was he what was he? He was honorable because he had the green. Yeah. Well, they said on his book, it says the Honorable. So I don't know. But anyway, he's did a lot of research, and I think that he probably, for First Baptist Church of Franklin, I think he probably has the most accurate history of that. There's several people that have written them, but it makes more sense what he says to me concerning First Baptist just from the geographical location of where Half Moon Bluff went. So, where it was at? At Bogalusa. I think so. I think that Pools Bluff subdivision in Bogalusa, where's that at, Carly? Pools Bluff subdivision in Bogalusa is about where it was. That's what I understand. That houses are built there now. That's what Half Moon Bluff Baptist Church. I've never been. First Baptist went there at the 100 in I guess 1912, or maybe it was 2012. It may have been the 200 year. First Baptist went there and commemorated it. But something I read, and there again, I really have never been there, Brother Wayne, but something I read said something about the Pine Bluff subdivision or something in Bogalusa, that there was a subdivision established where Half Moon was. But that makes more sense, it being over there by Philip Creel's. It makes a lot more sense. I've never seen it. I've never noticed it. Okay, so here we go. Half Moon Bluff joined the Mississippi Baptist Association in 1812. Now understand, at that time, there's nothing but Baptist. There's no labels. There's nothing. Either you're Baptist, Catholic, Methodist, Presbyterian, or nothing, you know. There's no this kind of Baptist or that kind of Baptist. They're just Baptist. And so in 1812, Half Moon Bluff joined the Mississippi Baptist Association. They actually, and I saw the minutes of this, they actually petitioned in 1811 for someone from the Mississippi Association to come. And one of the famous preachers of the association, Mercer, was supposed to come. Him and someone else was supposed to have come and constituted or organized into a Baptist church. You know, the way we do it today is we extend an arm. That's not how they always did it. And I think the reason for that was because of, again, geographical reasons. And so what they would do, they would let ordained preachers come from the association, and they would constitute the churches. They would organize the churches. So in 1812, I know that's very little. In 1812, 2 churches are received, and they're Half Moon Bluff and Jerusalem, the former being on the Bogue Chittle River in Louisiana, and the latter in Amite County. And then it has the name of the delegates. All right, any question? The Baptist Association of Mississippi was formed in 1806. Here is the 1806 Mississippi Baptist Association Articles of Faith. I want you to keep two things in mind now as we talk about it. There's two confessions of faith that predate any of this. The Philadelphia Confession of Faith and the New Hampshire Confession of Faith. The Philadelphia Confession of Faith is where the regular Baptists took their articles of faith, and that's kind of became their creed, if you will. The New Hampshire Confession of Faith, which is much, much less Calvinistic, is where the general Baptists took their confession of faith, and that's where they got their creed. So if you ever read the term general and regular, the whole deal is that the regular came from the Philadelphia Confession of Faith, and the regular came from the New Hampshire Confession of Faith. Now what that is, if you're wondering, is when, I think it was 1689 that they first drew up the Philadelphia Confession of Faith. It was 1740 or 42, I think, before they ever adopted it. They had to work it out and debate it for that many years. And so when they finally adopted it, what it was just an association of churches, of Baptist churches. And they said, this is what we believe. This is what we want the world to know we believe. So they write this confession of faith. New Hampshire says, we don't believe that. We're Baptists too, but there's some things we want to do different than that. And very quickly, they wrote the New Hampshire Confession of Faith, and that was their association of churches. And that's where the general came from. Okay, let's just look at it. And I mean, look. I mean, it is what it is. And sometimes, you know, I get tickled something. I can tell you a story about a guy that got on Ancestry.com. He wished he never had. Sometimes when you go to looking at your history, you know, you don't know what you're going to find. But this is what it is. And I haven't tried to shade it. I haven't tried to hide it. I mean, I've tried to just study it and learn it just the way it is. So I want you to look at it. All right, so what's the tulip doctrine? I have it on a slide. What's the tulip doctrine? Total depravity, right? Unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints. What is that? That's Calvinistic teaching. All right, let's go back to this is the confession of faith that the first church in Washington Parish adopted as their confession of faith. Okay? One's fine. I think we all believe that. Two, I think we all agree on that. Number three, we believe in the fall of Adam, the imputation of his sin to all posterity. Do you know what imputation means? Imputation is a banking term. It can be either a debit or credit. And so when imputation in the Bible means that, well, the righteousness of Christ is imputed on us at salvation. But our sin was imputed on Christ at the crucifixion, right? And so when we get saved, the righteousness of Christ is imputed in our account, is what Scripture teaches. And so what they're saying is that when Adam fell, he imputed his sin to all his posterity, which is true, in the total depravity of human nature. Now, folks, I don't believe that. And I think I'll maybe discuss that in one of the Bible studies. This is my belief. Someone or something that is totally depraved has no conscience about them, right? If we were totally depraved, every one of us would be mad dog killers. Every one of us would just, if total depravity is right, I don't agree that it is. I believe man is depraved in his nature. But I also believe that Scripture teaches us that God gave every man a conscience, right? You remember when the Pharisees approached Christ and they said, how do the Gentiles know to do right when they've never been taught right? And what did he say? They were given a conscience. They were not totally depraved because they had a conscience. and a man's inability to restore himself to the favor of God. We believe in the eternal, what? There's your you. Unconditional election of a definite, what's that? A definite number is limited atonement, right? Number of the human family to grace and glory. Is there any doubt in your mind what they're saying? Number 5, that's good. Number 6, we believe that those who were chosen in Christ before the foundation of the world are in time effectually called. What does that mean? That means that when God calls, it's so effectual that you can't refuse it. That He effectually, wherever you're at, He effectually draws you and calls you. But here's my question. Why didn't it work for Agrippa? Why didn't it work for Felix? Why didn't it work for those that Paul preached to? You remember, Paul preached all night one night. And what did the Bible say? Some believed and some did not. Why? Why does it work for some and don't work for others? Effectual call. I don't believe in effectual call. I know. Effectual call, irresistible grace, regenerated, converted, and sanctified and kept by the power of God through faith unto salvation. We're not studying Calvinism tonight. We're studying the history of the church. You know, that sounds good, the preservation of the saints, but the more you delve into Calvinism, the more you understand that we don't believe, or at least I don't, believe exactly the way that they taught it. All right? There's one more thing that sticks out about that to me. You see it in verse 9? In number 9? What does that mean? A general judgment. Everybody be resurrected at the same time, right? Everybody be judged at the same time. Lost to be on the left hand, the saved to be on the right hand. Anybody here believe in a general judgment? We believe that very differently, don't we? But those guys from Mississippi, when they crossed and came into Washington Parish, they didn't believe in it. And they taught Half Moon Bluff to believe this. And Half Moon Bluff believed it. And they accepted these articles of faith when they joined the Mississippi Association. Any question about that? Okay, so from 1806, I'm sorry, from 1812 to 1818, every church on the east side of the river, kind of went into Mississippi. In 1820, the Pearl River Association was formed. All of these are local associations. I'm sorry, I looked at that wrong. Just excuse me. 1818, that's when Willis formed the North Association. All right, 1820, the Pearl River Association was formed. But that still didn't really affect us. But then the churches of the Florida parishes stayed in the Mississippi Association until 1842, when they formed the East Louisiana Association. So basically, from 1812, it was 30 years before there was ever enough churches in the Florida parishes to form their own association. Up until that time, they stayed in the Mississippi Association. Any question about that? Okay, so in 1820, the Pearl River Baptist Association is organized. Now keep in mind, Half Moon, Mount Nebo, Half Moon goes defunct 10 years later, but Mount Nebo, they stay in the Mississippi and they join the Pearl River. There you see who they are. I don't know about this one. Beulah. I don't know which Beulah that is. There's several churches named Beulah, and I'm not sure that's Washington Parish Beulah. Lawrence County. What's Lawrence County? Monticello and Silver Creek. Amite. It was in Washington Parish to begin with, but it's in Amite. Organized in 1813, near Amite. Check out their articles of faith. Can you read them? They're basically the same. They're just a little worse. But I mean, it's Calvinist. There's no way to get around it. Number 4, eternal, unconditional election of a definite number. Where's effectual calling at? Well, number 3 is bad too. It's the same thing. And still general judgment. But here's something else I want you to see. Visible church. Visible church. In all of them, you never see anything but visible church. I'm going to tell you something about this universal church doctrine. It didn't come in till, much later. They believed in a general judgment, but they all believed in a real visible church. Any question about that? Okay, here's your churches organizing the East Louisiana Association, Mount Nebo, and I tried to put the date that they were organized. Now, I don't know about it. There's a Sharon Church that shows up in Washington Parish in 1818. And so Mr. Kelvin, Buford's brother, I think they're kin to some of the Hughes that established Sharon Church. And so, the best I can tell, Sharon Church, Alan, was formed in 1818. It disbanded for a little while, probably after the war. And then it got back together in 1841, but it disbanded again, even after 1841. And so then you had New Sharon form. And then I think eventually Sharon Church goes back, and in 1841 they form, and that's where it is now. It's on 16. But that's it. That's the East Louisiana Association. So in 1842, in the Florida parishes, you had an aggregate total of 699 members of Baptist churches. Yeah, that's up here at Kentwood. That's where Travis and Megan moved their letter to, right? Lion Creek. It's an old church. Okay. The East Louisiana Association Articles of Faith. Total depravity. Chose them in Christ before the foundation of the world. Calleth them with a holy and effectual calling. Being justified alone through the righteousness of Christ imputed to them, they are kept by the power of God in the faith and the salvation, a general judgment. But here's how they define church. We believe that a church of Jesus is a congregation of baptized believers, of immersed believers. Again, everywhere you find it in early Baptist history, nobody believed in a universal church. Do you know what I'm talking about, the difference between a universal and a visible church? Universal church people believe everybody that saves in the church, that they were baptized by the Holy Spirit. And visible church folks believe that you have to be baptized literally in the church. I'm one of those visible church folks. And here's why. The Lord said there's one Lord, one faith, and one what? One, right? Well, I've done that one. I've had that done. I've seen it done. That's the one I know about, is that one. The others I don't know anything about. Somebody else came up with that, right? One baptism. Okay, so everything rocks along to 1845. And that's when the Southern Baptist Convention is formed. Up until then, you have the triennial Baptists. North, south, east, and west Baptists. They come together. They have differences, but they've agreed on articles of faith, and the only reason they're coming together is for the furtherance of the cause of the gospel, for missions. That was the purpose of the Triennial Association. Southern Baptist Convention was formed because the General Convention of Baptists, formed in 1818, had elected officers from Boston that had included a resolution in its triennial meeting held the year before forbidding a slave owner to be a missionary. That's why the split. So I copied this from the Southern Baptist, from that minute. This is an excerpt from it. By this decision, the board had placed itself in direct opposition to the Constitution of the Convention. The only reason given for this extraordinary unconstitutional dictum being that the appointing power for wise and good purposes confided to the acting board. On such a slight show of authority, this board undertook to declare that to be a disqualification, and one who should offer himself for a missionary. What is a disqualification? That he owned slaves. I'm with them, aren't you? I might not have been in 1845, but I can tell you, looking back today, I don't have any problem in standing here and telling you that slavery was wrong then, it was wrong in Egypt, it was wrong in Louisiana, and it's wrong today. God never intended for people to be slaves. It was wrong. And so, but this is why the Southern Baptist Convention exists today. It is for that one reason. And this is what they said. It was forbidding us to speak unto the Gentiles. You have hindered our voice if you won't let slave owners go and preach the gospel. So, now, I tell you, in seminaries, in Southern Baptist churches, I mean, you know, revisionist history didn't just start. It's been around a long time. And the Southern Baptists have tried to do all they can to say that wasn't the reason. It was doctrinal reasons. But they stated in that minute that it was not. And I don't know if I copied that or not. Romish interdict. They compared it to the Roman Catholic Church dictating what people could do. Any question about the formation of the Southern Baptist Convention? Okay, here's a book that was written in 1918, I think. Maybe not. I think it may have been published a few years later, but was written in 1918. History of the Baptist Louisiana, John Tyler. The organization of the Baptist State Convention, this is talking about the Louisiana State Convention, and it happened in 1847, 2 years after the National Convention happened in 45. The Louisiana Baptists formed a Southern Baptist State Convention in 1847. And he said the reason for was a forward movement of the greatest importance. It did not appear to originate in one of the associations, but rather was the outcome of the counsels of some persons interested in missions and education. The evident purpose was to unify the brotherhood and to consolidate their thinking upon lines of progress and development. Prior to this date, a strict communion convention was agitated in Louisiana Association. You know what that means? Every time they came together, up until this date, every time that the associations met, they had communion. And they washed feet. And so that's what he said this was going on in Louisiana. In 1847, some of them got together, didn't keep any minutes, but the following year, a number of brethren belonging to Concord and Red River Association, according to appointment, met for deliberation at Mount Lebanon. First Saturday in December 1848, they had a sermon and they organized the Southern Baptist Convention of Louisiana. The Constitution demonstrates that the convention was fully missionary in its purposes and laid great stress upon the necessity of an educated ministry. They at once aligned themselves with and elected George W. Bain as a messenger to attend the Southern Baptist Convention, which was to meet in Nashville. It was alleged that there was much destitution in North Louisiana, and it recommended that the board employ as many efficient
missionaries as the funds of the convention may justify, at the fourth session, a general agent, J.Q. Burnett, was appointed at a salary of $800 for the year. This was a decided advance. The report of the committee on the subject was as follows. Any questions? Okay, so there are no delegates from Louisiana are recorded in 1851 to the SBC, Southern Baptist Convention, none. I don't know what that means. That just means that the Southern Baptists hadn't gained foothold in Louisiana as of yet, because what's just been 3 years, 48. There were none. And again, this is no problem to find. The Southern Baptists have all of their minutes archived on the internet. But 2 men were there that are very important to us and very important to our history. And they were J.R. Graves and J.M. Pendleton. I don't guess I named him, huh? Yeah, right here. And J.R. Graves. They're not only important to Baptist history in Washington Parish, they're directly important to Stony Point Baptist Church history. J.R. Graves, sir? They were preachers. Graves was from Tennessee. Pendleton was from Kentucky. And they, along with a guy from Mississippi, became the lead voices of the landmark movement. Sir? Where did it come about that the preacher would have a beard? Oh, I don't know. I'm thinking about growing one. Well, it's just a custom change. I don't know. I don't guess it's ever been they couldn't, Brother Ricky. Because some of them did.
Well, I'm just saying, I remember when we had our 100th anniversary, and you had to grow a beard. That wasn't what I was being taught back then, and I never grew a beard because that's what we was being taught.
Let me tell you about what we teach sometimes. What we teach is standards rather than principles. And that's what we do. And I think over time, we got some... I don't like them still, but right, Carly, and so anyway, I don't like them. I never have liked them, but I can't do nothing about it. But anyway, the point I'm making is not only for beards, but for a lot of things, men preached what they believed was right, what they preferred, what was their preference, rather than what was a biblical standard. So we'll move along. But these 2 men are very important. I'm sure you have. Yeah. What J.R. Graves did was he wrote a book, an old landmark reestablished, and he is known as the father of the landmark movement. Pendleton was a great debater and a great writer, wrote several books on it. Graves had control of the Baptist paper, the Southern Baptist paper, coming out of Memphis, and so he was able to propagate it to a lot more people in that time than other preachers. I mean, he was able to gain traction because he had the press, he had the paper. I'll quit in just a few minutes. Let me see why I put this in here. Okay, this is the Red River Association coming into the Southern Baptist Convention. They had fought it up till then, and what year is this? 1857. It took 10 years, but finally the Red River Baptists came in, and first when they were asked to join, they said that we cannot yet unanimously agree to become a component member of said convention in 1850. But in 1857, they did join. And one of the problems that the Red River folks had with it was the doctrinal statement being so Calvinistic. And so after 1960, on the eve of the Civil War, this is what the churches reported. They had but 10,000 members in the entire state of Louisiana, 200 churches and 100 ministers, and one college commenced but not, appropriated. And it talks about just how poor the state is and how people come here, they're swayed by the Roman Catholic religion. Talks about their commercial, how that, it's the territory is so different. There's farmland, water, sugar cane, and all kind of folks are here. Oh, this talks about Virginia, Louisiana. They fled to Texas. These are just some of the local associations. Now they're at war, and their numbers are going down, so they're struggling. A few Baptists came back after the war, but here's their problem. The Baptists of Louisiana, through their entire influence in favor of the Southern Confederacy, in some instances, church bells were given for the purpose of molding cannons for the defense of our country. These are some resolutions from the Southern Baptist Convention in wartime. And they're just pretty harsh. Go back and read them. That the cause for which our country is battling is just. I can't read that. I didn't make it big enough. All right, so the major problems that, we haven't left Graves and Pendleton now, we're coming back. But the major problems that the Southern Baptists had in the 19th century were, number one, Campbellites. That was number one. And that's this fellow here, Alexander Campbell. He came from a Presbyterian background. He was baptized by a Baptist church. And I don't know what his issue really was. He never was really a Baptist, but his deal was that all churches come together. Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, all churches come together and form one universal church for Christ. And that's what he pushed for. And it didn't fly with anybody. It didn't fly with the Baptist, Presbyterian, Baptist, Catholics, or anybody. And so what he done was he just made his own. Church of Christ, Campbellites. And so, man, he created a stir that was just of epic proportion. Then we had this guy, Daniel Parker. And what he taught was two-seed doctrine, Parkerism. And that's simple to understand. His idea of Calvinism is what you call hyper-Calvinism. The two-seed doctrine is that when Eve gave birth to those two boys, that one of them had the devil and one of them had the Lord. And one of them would never get rid of the devil and one of them would never get rid of the Lord. And that's just the way it was. And he used that to fight missions. He was known as the anti-mission, and he must have been, he was almost as ugly as Joel Osteen, but he was smart enough and evidently a good enough speaker to influence a lot of people. There was one year he set up 9 churches, and then this guy, Carroll, J.M. Carroll, wrote about him and said, for a guy to be anti-missionary, he done a pretty good job as a missionary, establishing 9 churches in 1 year. So, odd doctrine, odd fellow, Daniel Parker, but he made an influence. They talked about how black his eyes was and how mean he looked. People that wrote about him. And then the birth of the landmark movement was to combat both of them. If there had never been I probably shouldn't say, I'm going to say it. If there had never been Campbellites, there would have never been landmarks. Because what stirred Graves up and what stirred Pendleton up and what stirred Amos up was that, these people were coming in and preaching in Baptist pulpits. They were accepting anybody's baptism, no distinction. There was, and Alexander Campbell started that. And so as he gained traction and the Church of Christ started, man, it was a debate. They debated, back and forth. all the way up to about 1940 is when the Baptists really stopped debating them. But that's why it was formed. Amos Cooper Dayton, he's the one that was from Mississippi. And so the reason he had so much power, here's how they got it done. Pendleton was just, he wrote all kind of books. And you read them. They're great books. And then Graves, he was this dynamic preacher that had the press. And then Amos Cooper Dayton had been elected to be the corresponding secretary for the Southern Baptist Association. So for 4 years, he was in that position. Graves, Dayton, and Pendleton, they had it right where they wanted it. And they were making headroads with landmarkism. This is why. Pendleton wrote a book, not a book, an essay. Where are the old landmarks? Graves come back and put it in the, Graves published it in the paper. Then Graves took the essay as kind of a body for his book that he wrote, An Old Landmark Reestablished. And that's why it's called landmarkism. And here they are. This is what landmarkism is. Now, you couldn't convince the masses of this today. I never was told this as a child, I don't think. But this is what landmarkism is. Can Baptists consistently, with the principles of the Scripture, recognize, they won't even call them churches, he says societies, not organized according to the pattern of the Jerusalem church? Can you recognize Methodists and Presbyterians, whatever? Different governments, different officers, different class of members, different ordinances, doctrines, and practice as churches of Christ. Can you do that? Is Pendleton's question. And the answer is no. Let's put the landmark down, right? Ought they to be called gospel churches in a regular sense? Should they be? He said no. Another landmark. Can we consistently recognize the ministers of such irregular and unscriptural bodies as gospel ministers? Landmark. Is it not virtually recognizing them as official ministers to invite them to our pulpits, or by any other act that would or could be construed into such recognition? Are we not condoning them? Can we consistently address as brethren those professing Christianity who not only have not the doctrine of Christ and walk not according to His commandments, but are arrayed in direct and bitter opposition to them? He believed in direct succession. He believed the only church was the Baptist church. He believed John the Baptist was the first Baptist, that Jesus was baptized as a Baptist, and the Baptist church has existed all the way up in time before the Catholic Church. And he was good at telling people that, and people bought it. People believed it. Some. But boy, they're fighting in the Southern Baptists over it. But he dies a Southern Baptist. Pendleton dies a Southern Baptist. Dayton dies a Southern Baptist. J.E. Tull, a very recognized name in Southern Baptist ranks, said this, that his book, Dayton's, above all of their articles and books, that Dayton's probably made a more cogent attack upon alien immersions, which the landmark movement produced. Don't have a picture of him. Couldn't find one. All right, I'm going to quit. Let me get one more, and we'll pick up here. So, let me see. Did I put when Graves died? I think it was 1893. 10 years of his life, he was... yeah. And so Pendleton lived longer. I don't know. Graves, where did Pendleton? I don't know when Pendleton died, but I mean, they were, by 1893 they were gone. Pendleton, Graves outlived them, I think. And so 1893, you're covering 100 years of Baptist history, and you're covering all the history of the Southern Baptist movement. And in that 55 years, from 1845 to 1900, don't ever think it was smooth sailing for the Southern Baptists. The Civil War, and not only that, they had men, and when I tell you, they debated it, and when they believed something, they believed it with a staunchness. Just read it. It's just amazing. They would call each other everything but a child of God, and they were not friends, that's for sure. But they were trying to debate and trying to find their way and trying to, and it's kind of been that way throughout the Bible too, wasn't it? And I think that when we read the scripture, the kingdom of God is taken by force. It's not for weak men. It's not for what you expect to see in John the Baptist. He said, a reed shaking in the wind. When they came out and found him, he was in camel's hair and eating locusts and wild honey. What you expect to see, a reed shaking in the wind? When you talked to John the Baptist, you didn't have to wonder what gender he was, I don't think. There wasn't anything feminine about him. And so, as our culture has changed, and we come up with this toxic masculinity and I don't know, just the feminizing of our culture, that hadn't been good for us. But because, and I'm not talking about, people abusing. Abuse is wrong in any form. But there has always been a need for men to stand up and to show themselves men and to quit like men. And these fellows certainly did. And the one that followed them, Ben Bogard, was just as ferocious. And that's kind of closer to our history. He died in 1951. And so we'll pick up with Bogard next week. Any questions?
I'm just amazed. I thought Calvinism had just started, just a few years ago.
No, ma'am. It was first introduced in America like the end of 1678, something like that. Calvinism was first introduced to America. Let me just show you something, and we won't have to. Okay, so here's our lineage. Triennial Baptist Association, 1814. It lasted to 1845, and it was split, and the Southern Baptists formed. They formed another association after that. They've had a couple different names to it, but that don't affect us. All right, so in 1845, they fought and did all they did, and it lasted until 1905. And in 1905 is when Bogard from Arkansas met the association with a letter, and I'll read it to you next week. And he said, we're pulling out if y'all don't make some concessions. And they didn't make them, and they pulled out. And they became known as the General Association of Baptists of the United States of America. We began in the middle here. And there's no record of New Bethany or Stony Point ever in the General Association of Baptists of the United States of America. I know where they were. I didn't find out till today. But they never were there. I'll tell you where they were. The State Line Association was formed in 1902. Stony Point first associated with the State Line Association before they associated with anybody else. So they never was Southern Baptist. The first association they associated with was the State Line Association, who did associate with these folks, but Stony Point never represented in it. I've got all the records from 1905 through 2021 of the American Baptist Association. And none of them, Stony Point was never in it until where did I put it? All right, Stony Point was in the American Baptist Association from 1936 to 1951. It was in the State Line Association. I'll have to go back and get the original date for it, up until I was here previously, and we pulled out over over differences. And the difference was that they kicked Enos Branch out of the association in Carson Springs. That was the difference. In 1930, Benz Ford and Beulah Washington Parish shows up. In 1931, Canaan shows up. But we don't show up until 1936. So from our history beginning in 1910 until 1951, we were associated with the State Line Association, the American Baptist Association, we'll talk more about that in just a moment, and with the Louisiana State Association, which also formed in 1924, and that wasn't coincidental. These associations were lining up. This Louisiana State Association, which does not exist now, it combined with the State Line Association, was always an ABA association. In its beginning, it was an ABA association. We'll talk about the reason that they split. They did split. D.N. Jackson formed the North American Baptist Association in 1950. They changed back to the BMAA, which they're now known as the BMA, Baptist Missionary Association of America. They're normally just called the BMA. J.M. Stewart started the Faithway. I want to show you something right quick for you to think about. The 1957 State Line Association, there it is. Y'all know any of those people? By the way, Joe, Mount Sinai, man, it's got some old Southern Baptist roots. I don't know if them people accept it or not, but I found Mount Sinai in some of those Southern Baptists. And they met that General Association too. So Mount Sinai, I don't know how old is Mount Sinai, do you know? It's old, but I don't know how old. I know all those people mostly, all those churches. All right, so let's look at the State Line Association Articles of Faith and Rules of Decorum. 57, folks, you're in it. Can you read them? Let me read them to you. Okay, so they don't say total depravity. They just say depravity. I agree with that. But here we go. We believe that God has loved His people with an everlasting love. I mean, Ashley just scanned this out of the minute book for me. That He chose them in Christ before the foundation of the world. What is that? That's predestination, isn't it? That He calleth them with a holy and what kind of calling? Effectual calling. And being justified alone through the righteousness of Christ imputed to them, they are kept by the power of God until salvation. They don't believe in a general resurrection, though. At least in 57 they don't. They've changed it to that. Okay? So you'd have to say that this leads you to ask the question, what do they mean? Chosen before the foundations of the world, called with an effectual calling. Does that sound Calvinistic? The Louisiana State Association. I want to show you the difference. It was formed in 1924. Not 1902. It was affected by people out of Arkansas who had followed after the New Hampshire Articles of Faith, the New Hampshire Confession, rather than the other confession, the Philadelphia Confession. But we know all those people too. In fact, we're right here. Brother Bird was the pastor, your granddaddy. All right, let's look at theirs right quick before we go. All right, just see the difference of it. Triune Godhead, well, we believe that. Genesis account of creation, created from God, from the dust of the earth, not by evolution. Virgin birth of Jesus, deity of Jesus, crucifixion and suffering is vicarious and substitutionary. Bodily resurrection and ascension, the second coming, the Bible doctrine of eternal punishment, the impenitent, that all corporate bodies and association committees are and should be instruments of the service of the church. We believe the missionary church is the true church of Christ, was organized, commissioned by Him, and has been in existence in the world ever since Christ set it up to work, and that it will be so on and so forth. Man, what happened to the Calvinism? It's gone. Because it originated somewhere else, folks. It originated somewhere else. Now, I want to get out of here before I don't want to get out of here before I say this. I was born in 64. That wasn't too far removed from 57. But most of these men, you know, they were gone. I remember Brother Hamilton. I remember Lamar Breland. I remember Brother Carl. I remember Brother Enos. I don't remember Brother T.W. That was your granddaddy. So, I remember Brother Carl as one. Brother Enos, 2. Brother Stewart, 3. Brother Hamilton, 4. You remember Brother Johnny Soames and me? Remember Brother Johnny? Couldn't hardly talk, but he would get it. And I remember him. So, but I want to tell you folks something. I never heard these men preach anything remotely close to Calvinism. They preached whosoever will. And so I don't know. I mean, to explain it to you, I can't explain it, except it was something got put there. They didn't really pay attention to what it said. I don't know. But, I mean, it was there. And there's no...
I didn't know what articles of faith were until we started this. So
Well,
it seems
they're in every minute book.
I've been going to this church all my
Well, here they are, though, Trey.
life.
When you here's the thing, though. When you send a letter into an association, it says we agree to the articles of faith of this body. So, I mean, may not know what they were, but we agree to them.
Yeah, but that don't mean every member knows, you know.
No, it don't. No, that's what I'm saying. But, I mean, when you look at it, and what history will record is that, you know, when all of us are gone, and they look back at these associational minutes, they're going to say, you know, those bunch were Calvinists. That's what they said they were. I don't know. I don't know what to do about that. But, yeah, they were. A lot of that back then. My grandmother was a clerk in New Zion Hill. Mo Wine was a clerk of Sanford. I don't know if she ever held the title. He did, Brother Billy, and I agree with called according to the foreknowledge of God. But now that's different, Brother Billy, than effectual calling. God could have wrote the Lamb's Book of Life way before he ever created Adam. I agree with that. But that don't. I mean, are we going to say that some were chosen and some were not chosen? It leaves out the choice of man. And so he knew who was going to do it, but he gave all the opportunity. He didn't predestinate some to be saved. And I agree with what you're saying, but man, that's a long ways from Calvinism. It's a long ways from what effectual calling is.
Well, I think what happened when they formed these associations, they didn't give a lot of, they didn't do a lot of study of history, and so they just took what some people said as their articles of faith and went right on with it.
That's what they're doing, Brother Billy. You can see it all through the Southern Baptists. One association will copy the other association, word for word. And that's what happened here, is that this deal over Mississippi got copied into the State Line Association. But in 1924, they copied what the Arkansas people were doing, and that's why it's New Hampshire instead of Philadelphia. Nobody changed the belief at all. They believe the same thing. But I just think it's important that we know what we are associating with and who we are associating with. I think. Any other question or comment? I didn't mean to keep you this long, but I wanted you to see this before we went any further. All right. You going to give us a song, Trey?